Have you ever wondered why it feels so hard to let go of a resentment? Well, in this video, I'm talking about how resentments and codependency fuel each other in relationship. But if you're new, my name's Michelle Ferris. I'm a psychotherapist and I love helping people create relationships that work. So resentments are a huge issue in codependency recovery because as codependents, we don't tend to be really honest with how we feel. In fact, we're really good at pretending everything is okay. So in this video, I'm going to share why resentments are so difficult to let go of in codependency and what you can do to start healing. So codependency isn't just about helping others or being too nice. It's also a relationship pattern that keeps us stuck in hurt and resentment because we don't want to speak up. So let's go over a few of them right now. The first reason why resentment and codependency fuel each other is feelings of self-doubt. If you relate to codependency at all, you probably struggle with self-doubt. You might be questioning yourself constantly. Am I right? Am I being too sensitive? You might assume that other people are right, especially when your feelings are hurt or your boundaries are crossed. Because most of us who grew up developing codependent behaviors did not get our thoughts and feelings validated. So we naturally developed self-doubt. Because when your thoughts and feelings aren't validated growing up, we don't learn to pay attention to our feelings, we learn to ignore them or dismiss them. If you relate to this, say me too in the comments, the video is going to help. So when we doubt ourselves, it's really hard for us to own our resentment and to actually speak up about it. Because part of where resentments get tricky is that they're hidden. We pretend everything is okay in our relationships when it's really not. And as a result, we end up blaming ourselves because we don't believe what we think matters. Another reason resentment and codependency fuel each other is our fear of conflict. So because we're unsure of ourselves, we need to find other ways to get love. And that's why when we struggle with codependency, we become people pleasers. Because we're really good at knowing what other people want, but we're not really good at knowing what we want. And when we're people pleasers, this helps us avoid conflict. Because often we equate being in a conflict with somebody being really mad and potentially leaving us. So that resentment helps us avoid the truth in our relationships and look like everything is fine. The other reason resentment and codependency fuel each other is that we're hyper-focused on what other people need. We're really good at scanning the environment and seeing who needs help, who needs love and support, because that's how we get our value. But when we're constantly putting other people first, it's easy to feel taken advantage of and resentful because we're never putting our needs out there. Instead, we're always hyper-focused on taking care of everyone else so that we can feel safe or loved. I've done this so many times in my early recovery where somebody hurt my feelings and I immediately dismissed them because I didn't want to risk a conflict. And I thought, you know what? I'd rather have the relationship than be honest about myself and what I needed. And fast forward into recovery, that gets harder and harder because making progress in codependency recovery is about learning how to be authentic. And learning how to deal with resentment is a part of that. So another way resentment and codependency fuel each other is that we have difficulty setting boundaries. One of the most common signs of codependency is not being able to set boundaries. We pride ourselves on never saying no, always being helpful, always being the first to volunteer or say yes. The problem is that if we never allow ourselves to opt out and say no, we end up creating our own overwhelm because we're overdoing for everyone, but we're not fueling our own tank. And our self-care is no longer a priority. Now, this behavior is really hard to let go of in codependency recovery because often we get kudos for always being the one everyone goes to for support. Maybe we never say no, and people know that and love that about us because they can always count on us in a pinch. And that's why part of codependency is really learning to shift that identity from being that false self, that person that pretends everything's okay, to your authentic self, the person that says, ouch, this hurts and I need to speak up. When I started doing this in my recovery, my relationships got so much more authentic. And I finally felt like my needs count. I no longer sucked in all those feelings of resentment because I knew that eventually they would leak out. So another reason resentment and codependency fuel each other is that we get to be right for once. And I don't know about you, but in my childhood, I was never right. So fast forward into adult relationships, I wanted to be right. So if I felt like I had a justifiable hurt, I held on to it for dear life because I wanted somebody to see how much I was hurting. The problem was I wanted them to see how much I've been hurting for years and years, not just the present hurt. But we get stuck in holding on to that hurt because we expect other people to see it and validate it and tell us that we're right, and we finally have a reason to be upset. The problem is that most often this doesn't happen. Nobody really realizes that we're upset. And that's one of the biggest challenges with resentment, is that a resentment is a hidden hurt. Most people have no idea how we feel because we're really good at pretending everything is fine. Another reason resentment and codependency fuel each other is low self-worth. This is a major sign of codependency because we think we don't deserve better. We think, oh, I shouldn't speak up. That isn't okay. But what's ironic when you're codependent, I know for me I did this, is I let everybody else speak up. I thought absolutely they have a right to speak up and say they're hurt, but I never let myself have that same right. I always told myself things like, well, they should be able to do it. There was like this deep-seated belief that it was not okay for me to stand up for myself. But I thought everybody else deserved to speak up about their hurt except for me. If you relate to that, say me too in the comments. There's usually a lot of negative self-talk around this. Telling yourself things like, I don't deserve to be treated better, or I'm just not enough, or so-and-so is so much better than me. I shouldn't speak up. We make ourselves wrong for having the hurt feelings that we do, which is really a lot of times what our parents did growing up. They shamed us for how we felt instead of teaching us that our feelings were important and needed to be validated. Because we all feel hurt. That's part of life. But in codependency, we really bury that hurt because we're so afraid of it. We don't want it to cause problems in our relationship, and we try not to have those feelings, which is the next way resentments and codependency fuel each other, is we deny our emotions. Like for instance, when somebody hurts my feelings, now I can tell, I can feel that gut turning, and I have to pause and I have to decide whether or not I want to say something. But years ago, I didn't even notice I was hurt until about a week later. I just felt that yucky feeling in my stomach, and I knew that I didn't want to talk to that person anymore, but I didn't know why. But in recovery, you start to cultivate that intuition, and you notice that whatever just happened was not okay with you. And that's how we learn in recovery. But part of where resentments get really challenging is when we aren't willing to honor how we feel. We make ourselves wrong. We think, oh, everybody else can feel that way, but we can't. And this usually goes back to childhood, where we learn to deny and suppress our emotions. And part of healing our relationships is being able to have our emotions without judgment. So what can you do to start letting go of resentment? The first thing I want you to do is start journaling. And how I want you to start is just tell the story of all the hurt and pain that this resentment has caused you. What did they say? What did they do? What happened? What was the end result? Tell your story without censoring it. And what I mean by that is, don't think about it. Don't think, oh, I need to say this in a healthy way, because part of letting go of resentment is telling your story in an uncensored way first, so that you can get all the emotion out and then start to let go of it. So the next thing I need you to do is start validating your feelings. The next time somebody hurts your feelings, instead of dismissing it or telling yourself, oh, I'm being too sensitive, I want you to go, oh, wait a minute. What am I feeling right now? I even want you to say out loud, it's okay to feel hurt right now. I am not wrong. I am not bad. This is simply how I feel. Because that's how you're going to help the resentment not grow. Now your next step is, I want you to consider joining my workshop, where I take you through my 5-step process to heal your resentment and how you can start to make amends to yourself and others. Because sometimes we need to forgive ourselves to move on. And go watch my video on self-trust, because that's your next step. Thanks so much.